I'd like to welcome Alyssa Jewell to our class. And what I've deemed inside the writer's studio, yes, I am ripping off Inside the Actor's Studio. Awesome show. Um, and what I often do is ask my guests to introduce themselves, partly because I like to honor my guest's voice, because you know you better than I do. And yeah, and that's how I honor people's presence. So, what would you like us to know about you?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that warm welcome. Thank you for having me here. I love to talk about creative writing because it's really what I've been immersed in for about the last 8 years. I teach ESL here at GRCC, but I've also been in an MFA program down at Western Michigan University, doing poetry there. I kind of stumbled into it on accident, just through a series of taking different courses led me to poetry. Um, and so now I'm at Western again. I took a few years off and I'm doing a PhD in creative writing and poetry. I'm actually in a fiction workshop this semester, so I've really been enjoying writing fiction as well and kind of extending my repertoire. So for me, creative writing has been huge, especially in the last 8 years or so, but I'm still learning. I'm still growing. So I'm there with you. I'm there with you all.
Well, thank you, because I wasn't sure if you were done with your PhD program or not.
I just
So, but it's
started.
a PhD in creative writing.
Mhm.
Um, and I know for me, at some point, if you can work it in, it would be nice to know how, courses or workshops, how you are experiencing that at the PhD level. Because right now, like after our time with you today, students are workshopping their pieces and getting ready to submit them at the end of the semester. And it'd be interesting to hear how workshopping looks from that angle at some point. But you don't have to ask. I'll save that for later. I
Okay,
can.
sounds good.
All right. So, welcome. And do you want to just get started with something, or do you want to? I can ask the students if they read anything to get familiar with your work.
Sure.
Um, but you did tell us to read the first three poems to get a sense. And can you tell us a little bit about any of those, or however you want to get started? Students, people, you can raise your hand. And right now, if you read the pieces, you can start putting things in the chat also.
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful just to answer your questions. I'd be glad to do that. I can talk about the first three poems are just ones that I personally like and felt proud of after I wrote them. A lot of my work, as you can see, deals with like landscapes and, um, I'm from Grand Rapids, so there's a lot of Grand Rapids and Michigan imagery in my work. I've lived here for 38 years, so it's pretty ingrained in what I do. Yeah, so yeah, I'm definitely open to questions.
I think I will keep monitoring the chat to see if anything pops up there, and they know that they can use their reactions to raise hands or not. So,
Okay.
and so, however is you like to proceed, because this is the writer studio, and you're the writer.
um, y- yeah, so it looks like
Yep.
Mickey said, do you have a specific writing process? Yeah, and that's a great question. I was thinking about that for today, um, because right now I'm in a fiction workshop, and that for me is a pretty different process than writing poetry. Um, I would say, for a poem, um, it takes me a lot of work, a lot of thinking in a quiet space. It might involve like taking a walk if I have writer's block, or just doing a lot of reading, maybe signing on to an online journal and reading there, or reading just a book or an author that helps me to overcome writer's block if I'm having that. And there's different tricks that I do if I'm feeling stuck in getting a poem to come onto the page. I know sometimes people say like, oh, just sit down and just do your writing. That works for me for writing prose. For fiction, like like Anne Lamott, I think says like, do your 500 words, maybe only 100 of them are salvageable, but she's talking about writing prose, right? So if you sit down and you just put your butt in the chair and show up and do your writing, like that works for me for writing prose. For poetry, it's a little different. It has to be more like, I really have to feel it. It has to really feel true. And it has to be something that's like almost physically pushing against me in order to have this poem that feels alive and fresh on the page. Yeah.
Well, I'm just typing in some of the things that I hear and trying to bring the audience in a little bit by saying that that's a really great question. And you've given us some things that you do, but I also want them to think about, well, do they consider some challenges, especially in an artificial space like a classroom? Because I'm not very, sensitive to individual writing techniques. I'm like, nope, this week we are looking at this week we're looking at energy. I know you still want to talk about insight, but we're talking about this now. So thinking about who you are in a sense when you're writing different types of pieces. So did I get it right that for you, poetry, you're very active, like you're doing a whole looking at a lot of different things? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because I think poetry, you can bring in so much, and you can do that with prose too. But like, if I look at like, we talked about free verse earlier, like if you start with an image, like maybe you wake up in the morning and you've got something from your dream that's just still there, and you put that in, and then maybe that takes you to an image in your memory. And then maybe like you look out the window, like I remember this actually happened to me. Like I looked out the window and I was writing this poem about a woman who was hit by a meteorite. And at that moment, like a piece of like a dove feather like drifted by, and I was like, put it in, like, and so you can pull in so much from your mind, your memory, your environment. To me, like there's a lot of energy going into a poem, whereas like when I'm writing fiction, I can just kind of lay back a little bit and just let things linger and come to me and sit in the moment a little bit more, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So I'm hearing, and I may be not hearing this correctly, but it seems like there's a sense of urgency, more like an urgency with poetry that might
Um,
be making you a bit more active. But with the prose, you can take a little more strategic, like, hey, let me see how this unfolds. Or Mike.
yeah, I think urgency is huge. I actually wrote that down in my notes for today, because when I read poems, I edit poems for Waxwing, and I've edited poems for New Issues Press as well. So you're reading all these poems just coming in at you, hundreds and hundreds of them. And the ones that stand out to me and the ones I feel invested in are the ones where the writer really feels like there's an urgency, or like they really have something to say and they just need to get it off their chest. Yeah, for sure.
There was another question someone asked. Do you know the format or shape your let me just read it exactly. Do you go into a poem knowing the format you want to shape it, or does that come later and thinking,
No, I like to play around with the format. I think I didn't really feel confident with that at first, when I wrote some early poems, I didn't really know where to put the line breaks and that kind of thing. And I think just as you practice and keep going with poetry, you kind of just see like, hey, maybe this line needs to be longer. Maybe this line needs to be shorter. Maybe this would be more interesting if I played with the white space a little bit. So I think the words that you choose and the ideas and the images, they can often lead the form that you have on the page, if that makes sense. I let the poem go where it wants to go, I guess.
And I did not finish the question, but that was me. I gave a little pause, which made it seem like I was done, but I was just pausing.
Okay, all right.
But I would, if this, Alina, if you don't mind, can you just ask your question yourself so it'll be complete, and then you don't have to worry about me chopping it up and missing some part of it. So if that will work, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself as soon as I find your name. There you are in this list. Okay, unmute yourself. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically of like Midwestern Triptych. Was it 1997? I found that one really interesting because of the way, not just with the line breaks, but with like the spacing and everything. So like when you think about like when you sort of have that little seed, like do you think like, oh, this is going to be one that I play around with like the blank space, or does it happen like as you're writing, or is it something that comes like with editing and revision and drafts?
Yeah, thank you. That's great. That poem was interesting for me because I think I started the first section and then I left it for about 2 years, and then I found it in my notes and I was like, oh, like I actually like the language here. But I think I just had all the words clustered in a block together. And so I thought, like, what can I do with this that would make it more interesting? And I was playing around with like more language driven poetry at that time where there's not quite a strong narrative thread in that poem. So I think I was just thinking about ways to make it more interesting with that first section. And then I thought, okay, I'm playing around with the lines. This is cool. Maybe because this is short, I could do this a couple more times and see where this takes me. And with that, I also had a lot of just images in my memory. It's from 1997, right? So I was kind of pulling from that time in my life, thinking about, I guess I was in high school then. So yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I have, okay, so another person asked, I don't know if this was answered or not, but when you write, do you write for the purpose of saying something or more for enjoyment?
Yeah, that's great. I think those two things for me are very much linked, enjoyment and saying something. And there's a quote from Katie Ford, and she's a poet that I like, and maybe this doesn't sound too pleasant, but maybe this kind of speaks to that. She said, I could strangle a poem into being for months and months, and it can end up flat and dead. It's truly when something bears down on my own physiological life. Here I might include physiological, emotional, spiritual, and even intellectual, which is so often upsetting and pains or confuses the other elements that I begin a more natural kind of writing. And so for me, it's an enjoyment to get those tensions and those stresses and those urgencies out on the page. And you don't have to make the poem sad. It doesn't have to be about all these like tensions. Like I think about Ross Gay, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. Like there can be joy in poetry too, but I think joy is a type of tension too. Like you wanna share joy with others. So yeah, that's a good question.
That was Macy. Do you have a follow-up for that? Was your question? You can unmute yourself if you have a follow-up or if any comments about that response. Was it helpful? Uh-oh, am I putting you on the spot? You are unmuted, Macy.
Oh my God, I am.
Yes, you are.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to talk. Okay, so no, she doesn't. Okay. But I came back, and what I heard in that is still that sense of urgency to get something out. I see another question. I'll do the same thing. I'll read it and then I'll see if that person needs to add. The question is, when you utilize the visual aspect of poetry, how do you read it? Or do you avoid reading it aloud?
Oh, I know some poets who say they never read their poems out loud, but I do. I don't, just when I'm by myself, talking to myself. I like to hear it out loud because sound is such a huge part of poetry for me. The words you choose, the length of breath in a line, maybe you have a nice long, luxurious line, and then you kind of pull away from that and go into something shorter. So I think, yeah, I definitely think sound and breath are all related to how the poem looks on the page. And, you know, sometimes I just like the way it looks, like artistically. I like to draw and I like to paint. So I feel like that's in there too.
Do you want to add anything to that response? You go ahead. No, Adrienne?
Oh, I'm good.
Oh, I couldn't get it. Oh, there. Sorry. No, specifically, like for instance, in the triptych, you know, it kind of looks like a river and that flowing aspect, which I think adds to it. But like, if you're doing it as, you know, more of a speech form, like, do you think it loses some of that aspect, or do you try to also keep that in its sound and feeling in verbal form as well?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's cool because like poems can do all the things that you're talking about, right? Like you can look at the visual aspect. You can look at how the longer line is going to sound when you say it out loud. I think there's all different pieces of the puzzle that come together. And I do think about things like, if I put all these words together and then I break away from that, how is that going to sound? So I think you do have to kind of practice with how to read a poem out loud, if that makes sense. Like, you know, if you kind of do like a short little pause at the end of the line and then you go to the next line, but if there's a comma or there's a punctuation at the end of the line, it's a longer pause. So all of those things are definitely coming together.
Well, I want to thank you for a couple of things, and I'm going to pull something from the other guests we had inside the writer studio with EN248. Our first guest talked about spelling and how spelling and not necessarily spelling things correctly is one of the things that he does.
Cool. Yeah.
So we're reading pieces like, is that right? He was like, yeah, I don't really, which is an interesting way of how do you express yourself. But also I've been thinking about, and that was GF Corick we had on in class. But even the constraints that the page has to deliver what you can do when you're speaking it. And everyone, if you think about it this way, if you take a poem, any poem that you have already, and then rewrite it, trying to rewrite it, just another version, how you actually speak it, spelling and all. I wonder what that would look like, you know?
Yeah.
So even how, because if you draw out words, if it says cat, but you say it like cat, then what happens if you just did a version of it, a phonetic version? What would happen to that what would happen to any piece of nice poem? Even if you took something that is very formed, like this is a sonnet and this is but this is how it's read. And then what happens if you rewrite it, how as close to the word as possible? You're going to have two pretty interesting. That's literally just something I just made up on the spot. But
I love thinking about that though. I think I would like to play with that a little bit more. Like I have one, I'll type it in the chat. Like there's one line, and I don't know if I put this in the packet, but it's like touch, 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 like to, playing with that kind of thing. But I have not done a lot with that, but I think of like Diana Coy Nguyen, who plays a lot with like concrete poetry and image on the page. And we just see a lot more coming through with like playing around with visuals and sound these days. So that's a cool direction to head in. Yeah.
And Adri just put something in the chat that reminded me. We do this often when we imitate like dialects, saying the same word in a Boston dialect.
Yeah.
And even if I guess that's another way to think about it. If you took a poem that you've written and then write it in a dialect, you see what happens to it.
Oh, for sure. That's so cool. Yeah. And I love that because, I teach ESL, so I'm hearing a lot of English varieties throughout the day. And yeah, I think that's really great.
I do have a follow-up because it's not something that we covered in class. You mentioned concrete poetry.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something we've had. And the question is, what's the name for concrete poetry? So
Oh, the author that I mentioned, Diana Coy Wynn. And I could like pull her book here if we want at the end. I have it right next to me, but she just plays around with like the white space and will like do text that overlaps each other. And there's a very visual element to her poetry. And I think that's true of Ocean Vuong as well, somebody else who comes to mind. Yeah.
And I'm forever trying to just bring things back to the funness of having a textbook. But concrete poetry would fit in with the things we're talking about: energy, principles of energy, and also images. So images, bringing images and descriptions to life. So
wow,
it would fit in. Concrete poetry would fit in with some of those principles that I'm trying to get you to think about.
Wow.
I think.
I love, like, are you talking about energy? Like
how to make your writing, how to fuse it with movement and energy. So the principles, so we looked at, I like this textbook because it's not broken down by genres, it's broken down by creative writing principles. So each chapter, you can use these principles to write any type of creative genre. So we started with insight because I reminded everybody, please have a point. So just for this class, have a point, have something you want to be discovered. So we started with insight and we came back to insight because insight is actually chapter 8. But we looked at writing strategies. So images, how images are active. How do you read? Reading is image viewing. So when you mention concrete poetry, even though that's not something we talked about in class, I'm like, oh, these are the principles, everyone, that concrete poetry fits in with. But specifically, energy was looking at very much like playing around with words, word order, syntax.
yes.
Some of the people in the class that I've talked to already, they could say, like, I would spend time looking at their pieces and just saying, well, why don't you just move these words? What happens if you just, or what happens if you do something with the repeated phrases? So
yeah. I think I just was writing a poem where I took the end and made it the beginning, or switching things around, or you do have to look at the sentence that you're dealing with. I mean, are you dealing with one long sentence? Can you stop that energy with like a short, simple sentence, but the rest is this huge thing with all these different clauses? I mean, there's a lot to pay attention to with grammar and energy, which I think is fascinating. Yeah, that's very cool.
And so, yeah, so that's some of the points you were making, like, oh, what have we heard? My job is just try to make some connections
Yeah.
for my sake and for the people in the class as they try to tell me at the end what they're doing. And then we had someone who talked about spoken word. So that Azizi Jasper came in to the class and spent a lot of time. So I'm glad you talked about, yes, you do read your pieces aloud. So he spent a little time talking about, what that medium is like, spoken word and the differences between spoken word and slam. But
I know. My sister loves spoken word. She's like, she goes to all the competitions and everything. I love it and I love listening to it, but I've never like practiced it. I've never done like what Azizi does.
well, I think, if anyone wants to chime in, I think that was my mini lesson on the difference between spoken word and slam poetry,
Mm,
which is the competition, which is a very different
mm,
thing. And so he was able to make some differences. But there's some poems that are meant, I think, that are meant to be heard aloud, whether or not they're spoken word or not. They're just, and I think one of your like the images, or even invites the reader into the reading of it by what it looks like.
mm,
But
cool.
this is not supposed to be just the two of us chatting. And I'm looking at our time.
Yes,
I
please.
know before someone types it into the chat, will she read something?
Oh my
That's
gosh.
something they always want to know is, are you going to read? So we still have about a half an hour.
Okay.
Um,
Thanks for the living room. Shout out. Thank you. See that.
oh, and again, anyone else if you can make any suggestions. And this is also a time you could ask questions that are, you based, if you have something, especially now that you're working on moving from drafts to finished products, like they're going into smart groups workshops. I've given them some guidance. I have no idea how much and how closely they're following that, but they have some. But
yeah.
oh, I guess the question was, you're like from where you are at the PhD. So, there's got your bachelor's, got a master. Now you're going to be a doctor of creative writing
We'll see.
doctor to be. Yeah. So what does workshopping look like? I still want to know that.
Yeah, right now I am only in fiction workshop, but in the past with poetry workshop, I mean, it's always different, but usually you get a packet of poems every week from different people in the class, usually about 4 or 5 poems, and each person gets about 20 minutes and we go through and talk about things that are working and questions we have, and try to keep it really respectful, I think. We're all there to cheer each other on and just make things the best that they can be. I think it's intimidating at first, especially because when I first started workshop, I was not actually in the poetry program. I was just taking it as an elective, and I remember having some pretty anxious moments and being really afraid of being with all these graduate students, MFA and PhD. And then I just kind of worked through it and read a lot and tried to catch up with these people, but I was up for the challenge. And then once you get used to it, then it's just kind of like, oh, workshop this week, no big deal.
So do you just exchange the poems, or do you ever read aloud and talk to each other?
Usually with poetry workshop, each person would read their poem that they submitted so that we could hear the poem in the poet's voice. And then we just kind of go around in a circle and talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds familiar to me anyway. All right, go ahead.
Did you do a workshop? Did you do an MFA?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I did some I did writers retreats, and I did a couple of those, like almost 20 years ago. But
Okay.
I think the writers retreat is even more intimidating because you only have like 3 weeks with this group of people. So it's
Yeah.
like everything squished into one. But they were with people I had read about, or like so I was starstruck too. So
Yeah.
Ishmael Reed is one of the people I did a workshop with, and he's written across all the genres. And he was really scary.
Yeah.
And it was like 10 of us in a workshop in this down in Florida, and he walked into the room, and we were all like, so students, we were all like, what do we expect? We didn't know. He walked into the room and he said, I want you to write about a fruit or a vegetable. And then he left the room, and we were like,
Oh.
what? And he's like, and it's due tomorrow. Yeah. So I didn't sleep. Most of us didn't sleep. We were just really freaked out.
Whoa.
But you know what? We turned in some, like nothing was safe. Like nobody did any safe stuff. We just turned it in, and it was due the next day. And then we had to have individual conferences with him for like 2 hours. So it was really intimidating and scary, but I did well. So
Yeah, that's so cool.
he got a little nicer after that. But.
That's good. I mean, it is scary when you go into these workshops and the teachers have been doing this for 30 or 40 years and you're like, don't laugh at me. But they don't. They're nice. Yeah.
Yes. So, but yeah, so I wonder, because you have such an eclectic background. So you teach ESL. I'm not sure if I'm not sure everyone knows what that means, but that I wonder, just because you also said you hear in what you teach, you hear different dialects and people. How does that affect your creative side? Is that like something you can fold in and be like, oh, I can think about some new things to do maybe?
I think so. ESL is teaching English as a second language. Like there's a lot of like grammar and technical stuff, and like you're building up language skills, like kind of like piece by piece. So you're looking at phonemes and morphemes and all the stuff that you learn about in linguistics. And so I think just because I am paying such careful attention to my students' language, that and helping them to improve, that I naturally pay attention more to my own choices. I love teaching ESL, and I love having like that creative side too. And when you can bring them together, all the better. It's a joy for sure. And it's actually something I want to study in my Ph.D. program, kind of bringing creative writing and ESL together. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm reading the question. Do you see that question about
in ESL? How do you, that one?
Mm-hmm.
How do you mesh people coming from Chinese and like, so people with all different language backgrounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, so all of our instruction is done in English, and at GRCC, they have to have a base level before they can come into our program. So if they don't have that level, they go to a different program at like a learning corner or something like that. So we communicate in English, and you just have to be careful about your word choices and make sure that people are comprehending. Yeah.
And there's poetry out there that mixes languages. I find that interesting.
Yeah.
I don't have any I can't think of any author or poet that to mind, but I was in a workshop with someone, and the effort, like it looked effortless how she could mesh English and Spanish in such a way that even if we didn't know the Spanish, we knew what she was talking about. So I was like, that's cool.
Yeah, I feel really passionate about that, actually. I think that's such a great thing. And especially with creative writing, and there's so much room to play around, and you don't want to be like, oh, English only. It's like, if you speak more than one language, you have a superpower, right? Like, you are at an advantage, and it's like, use it, bring it in. And like you said, Marcelata, like, you know the tone, and you know what's coming through, even if you don't know the words, I think. And yeah, I'm blanking on names right now.
But that's a shout out to everyone in class. I haven't talked about that. Sometimes I can't get everything, but if you are quadrilingual,
Mhm.
this is an opportunity. This is the kind of class where you want to bring that to the page and do something with. Now, if you're just learning it, you might not sort of want to, but if you have that in your, like, for example, I don't speak Arabic at all, like fluently, but I know a bit of Arabic. As a child, and we have Arabic words that my family we use. So some of that I'm comfortable with putting that in my writing. But so yeah, shout out to you. If you have it, use it. It's part of your tool,
Yeah.
your tools. So I see this comment from a student who said that they bartended at a writers convention and the writers getting hammered and dancing, though they assumed that's what the evening and events were like. During the days they did teaching events and symposia. So I guess do work and play hard. Yes.
Yeah. I've never actually gone to a writing retreat. I'm doing my first online something like that this summer, but it's online, so I don't think it'll be as wild as that. But I'm sure, yeah, a writers convention would actually probably be fun, I think.
I'm thinking that must have been all of the teachers, because the students were somewhere trying to figure out how to write about a fruit or a vegetable overnight.
Yeah.
For one of those people.
Gotta blow off steam. Yeah.
Oh yes. Habibi means my love, or love, like something like that in Arabic.
Oh.
So are you all ready? Are you good? Or do you want to read something for us?
Oh, I can.
Well, let me ask. Is that still your expectation, people in class? Or your ask? Show of hands, reactions. I'm just trying to guide our last few minutes and make sure that they're useful for you. I got it. Yes. Of course they want you to read. That's like build up. All right.
Okay.
Um,
So am I going to read, and then maybe a couple other people will read? Deal?
Emily. Which Emily? Which one was it? I didn't put the last name. Are you both here today? I have two Emilys. No, just one. All right. Can you, okay. I know I have one person. I had some people from last week, so I only had about a few people, and I'm trying to get folk who have not taken a risk yet. Come on. And as I said, I had people who did do this last semester, so I'm leaning really hard on my people who weren't in my class last semester. Emily H, are you one of them? Gonna go? And I know I have Audrey. Oh, was it? Oh yeah, Elena. Okay, yes, that's who it was. Yes, we're good. So I just wanted to make sure. So I don't want there to be a gap when you're done, so I can sort of put people in the row. So I have Elena and Adri. That's who it was. I'm sorry, Emily, if I kept picking on you. It wasn't you. Okay. All right. So we have 2 people and maybe me. So that should be enough time. Remember, this is not your 8-minute piece. It's like 2 minutes or something. Yeah. All right. So yeah. Okay. I have 3 people. I have Bailey, Adri, and Elena.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to hear what y'all have been working on. I'll start out. This is a poem Marcelata talked maybe a little bit earlier about like having a narrative thread in a poem, and I would say this poem has a pretty strong narrative thread. It's called Outland, and I wrote it. I was thinking about my friend who I used to work with, and I worked at Baskin Robbins for 12 years. And so I have a lot of memories. You guys remember Baskin Robbins on Plainfield. But after school and stuff, I would go to her house, and she had a horse. And so I have a lot of memories of her riding this horse and just in that time period. So yes, looking at the chat. Okay, this is called Outland. There are miracles we almost hold in our hands, as when a hungry animal takes a step back from a smaller one, leaves it to survive. And so wandering around in my own gentle ambition, I lacquered my black boots silver and stepped up from a bygone family basement into dayshine. There over the train tracks, just through the backyard and a bit of forest, seemed as good a clearing as any, to sketch another world in the dirt and to meet a rider, Alina, whose horse shone like copper and fire flint, every part of him. She snuck him vanilla wafers, rode Eli each afternoon through a greening field, and at sundown led his great body to rest in a haunted barn that scraped with long gone boot steps and shifting bales of hay. She never sensed he was afraid, not even when on a spring lope through the clear, late day's honeyed light, she and Eli stood watch against a bobcat swimming through the tall grass, their cluster of spirits separate and paused in the cooling. They locked into one another, 6 eyes building chain link across an impossible expanse, minds electric with wondering where the leaning night might take their hearts and how best to rend themselves out from inside. Thank you. Would love to hear your poems too.
All right. Thank you so much. You can put snaps in the chat, and you can even, ask her something, or something catches your attention. The lineup we have is going, I think is appropriate that Alina is going next. I think I heard a similar name in the poem.
Yes, Alina, yes.
Alina.
Cool.
So that's our lineup, Alina, Adri, and Bailey. So what we're going to do, so remember, I am recording this. It's up to you. If you put your camera on, you will be on, but we will definitely have your voice because it's completely up to you. So I'm going to just change my view to speaker mode, make sure I have that. And let's see, gallery. And I'm going to unpin and put it on speaker. All right, up next on Inside the Writer Studio, open mic with Alyssa Jewell is Alina. Oh, I gotta unmute you. Sorry, I'm like, what's going on? My mistake. I have a lot of jobs right now. And I just have to find you. And there you are. I see you. Lovely face. Unmute. Okay.
Okay, hello again. This poem is called Spite for the Sad Bird. And it's one that I wrote when I saw a snippet of poetry. And I talked about this with a professor last week, that it was Sad Birds Still Sing. And that sort of stuck in my head because I sort of had a moment of like, well, of course. So that's the name of the poem. Of course the sad birds sing. They sing just as loud, no, louder than the joyful ones. What better way to process life, death, trauma, loss, success, loneliness, all the emptiness in our chests and the tears in our eyes, hell, everything, than to sing. Catharsis embodied takes many forms. I sing until my lungs bleed. I sing until my voice gives out, until the neighbors call, until the wolf howls, and I don't give a damn if it sounds good. Good? What the hell is good? What do I want with it? No, it is the expulsion of raw emotion and air that can only really happen in those moments. The ones where oxygen seems like it just isn't there, or maybe it's thinner, and you have to breathe 3 times as much just to get a chest full of air. In those moments, when you sing out a song, any song, or even no song at all, that is you regaining your power, your agency. That is a big fuck you to the universe and its trials, its tribulations, saying, you keep my air from me, take the rest. I will not beg. And if I fall, I will do it on my own terms. I do not need to be lit on fire to see if I will burn. Tie me to a stake and I'll show you how brightly I will shine. I could blind all of you in the blink of an eye. I won't, but I could. I do not have control over much, but the little I have, I will hold so tightly, you will have to pry it from me. And if that is my reason to stay alive, spite in all its gorgeous fury, then I will be all the stronger for it. So yes, the sad bird sings. It sings just as majestically as the happy bird and twice as loud. Sorry, I forgot that one first.
Oh, you know, in the context of what is needed, that's what is needed. So thank you. Alyssa, you should be able to unmute yourself.
That was, yeah, I was with you the whole time. That really moved me. Thank you so much. That's like when we were talking about urgency, like I felt that 100%. Thank you. Beautiful.
All right, Adri, you're up next. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. I am going to share what I described to the professor earlier as a rage sonnet. So you'll soon see why. So the working title right now is Sonnet for American Deception. See liars prance in golden ephods, worship at the altar of empty words. Rumors and lies on the wings of blue birds. Come, leave your offering for plastic gods. With whitewashed teeth and silver tongue, conmen hawking pyrite cures at pulpits. Disciples duped by Judas' kiss. Snake oil potions brewed from incense and dung. Washing themselves in choleric falls, admiring the fresh paint on mildew walls. From the megachurches of suburbia wafts the stench of Christian America. I was angry that day.
Yeah, I mean, you said it's angry, but I mean, there's just such a beautiful, quiet intensity to that poem, and the different environments and the wall and everything you pull in is just really powerful. Yes, thank you. I love rage in poetry. More rage in poetry. Let's do it.
Okay, so up next is Bailey. Let me get you unmuted here. Gotta find you in the list here. There you are. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
There we are. Okay. So, mine's called Medusa, so you can probably tell what the poem's about. It's a gaze of stone, eyes of haunted sorrow. Monster, mother, murderer, temptress slain. Was she by nature rotten or by fate? Rejected by the gods who turned their gaze. They were her ruin and her salvation. Was she transformed for their pride or their shame? Or was changing her a way to keep safe from the horrors that had been committed? Retribution was a way for her to become a monster and stay protected, safe from harm and those who would commit it, until the hero came to strike her head, not for glory or riches, but by fate. Prophecy fulfilled, Medusa is now, adorning the goddess Athena's shield. She keeps watch for all of eternity. And that's it.
Oh, thank you, Bailey. That was so cool. I love when people bring in mythology into their poems, and it's something that I wish I could do more of. So that's just, it's really creative. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there's two sides to the legend. You know, the one that we know, she was assaulted in the temple, turned into a monster because she desecrated it. But there's also another side, like what women told each other. She was a symbol for safe haven in ancient Greece, and some of them say she wasn't turned as punishment, but as protection, so that nothing like that would ever happen to her again. And anyone who tried, she could save herself, and they would be punished for doing, you know, bad things again.
Yeah, it sounds like there's so much tension in that story, and I feel like that's such a good instinct to like pull on that tension and put it in a poem. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much to everybody who shared. Like I said, I'm not in a poetry workshop right now, so I miss hearing poetry. This is great.
Well, I also like that read, and that was a individual who was in the class last semester. So I appreciate you coming out of your shell this semester and sharing that.
Cool.
But I remember that piece, and I like it because it helps us, which I think is something that Thomas Lynch mentioned in his video when he came to the class, to tell different stories. I shouldn't say different stories, but to fill out the stories that we know with more substance, right?
Mhm.
Because your explanation of the research you did, that's the version of Medusa's story that perhaps women told. So it's a different perspective, the same story, but another perspective. And we don't, and when we don't get, you know, different voices, it's all the same human story, but when we get the different voices, we can get the richness, and we can think from different angles.
Yeah. And I think it's important to have that kind of like transformative quality to your work. And like when I'm reading for poetry submissions to journals, you want to see those different perspectives and those different angles, and help me see something that I've seen a million times in a different way. Yeah, for sure.
And I want to say thank you for joining us. This is when we're going to transition. And this is when I try to give people, because people may want to just say something. And this is where I give you a few minutes to unmute yourself if you want to say some parting words to our guest. So everyone can do that right now for about the next 3 minutes. So you should have the power to unmute yourself, but if you raise your hand, we can still see who's talking. So any parting words? The chat is great to put them in there, but you might want to say something as we move from this to workshops. Everybody's going to be shy now. Look at that.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Macy.
Oh,
thank you, everybody.
I see a hand. Yeah,
Okay.
please put it in the chat, but go ahead, Adam.
Oh, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to talk with us and share a little bit with us. Dog, not you. And I was just curious, like, if you had a plan or a thought to share like this poetry thing, because you say you don't workshop right now. Do you have a plan to like get with a group of people to do that kind of thing? I mean, we live in the digital age.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Thank you again for having me here, and this has just been a pleasure. I actually just found out I'm going to do an online workshop this summer with Gregory Pardlow, who won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry a few years ago. So he edits the Virginia Quarterly Review. So it's a workshop based out of Colorado, but I get to do it from my home, and I'm really excited. Yeah.
I could also tell everyone, I encourage you to look for retreats. Often
Yeah.
retreats can lead to publishing opportunities because of the people who run them.
Yeah, and just, I mean, I'm really just looking forward to that sense of community, and you all probably, I feel like there's a great community here, even just reading this chat. So I love being around other writers and having that creative environment. Yeah.
I think one last thing, don't you edit um I don't know, is it paper? Is it online? I don't know.
Waxwing is online, yes.
So do you accept submissions from all over, or and
Yeah.
before COVID, were you hosting something too, or did I make that up?
No, we actually host online right now. It's called Poets in Print. It's a reading series out of Kalamazoo, and they make letterpress broadsides for the poets, which is like an old-fashioned press, and they do the letters and put them in and do a drawing that goes with it, and the poets come from different parts of the country and read, but now we're just doing it online this year. So we actually have our last reading. It's Jose Olivares and Todd Kaneko on Saturday.
You see, the people in this class are on it. Adam has
Yeah.
posted something in, can we get information there?
So
Or-
for Waxwing or for the reading?
Everything you're talking about.
Okay. Yes, Kalamazoo Book Arts Center. If you Google them, the event will come up right away. So that is, oh my gosh, thank you. And yeah, it's at 7:00 on Zoom. I think it's going to be great. And then Waxwing, we have different times where we're open and you can send in, definitely. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. Thank you for being with us. And as soon as Media Tech makes this video beautiful, I will make sure you have the link to it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. It was nice to meet all of you and good to see you, Mercelada.
Good to see you. Thanks. Bye.
Have a good night.